I'm Dorothy Miller. I'm 81 years old. And before you scroll away, before you shake your head and say, that old woman doesn't understand love anymore, let me tell you something most people are too polite to say out loud. You probably married the wrong person. Yeah, I said it. And if that sentence just made your stomach drop, good, because the truth usually does. But don't close this yet. Because the reason my husband and I stayed married for 57 years, until the day he passed away in a hospital room in Cleveland, Ohio, has nothing to do with soulmates, nothing to do with destiny, and absolutely nothing to do with that fairy tale nonsense people keep selling about finding the one. I was 23 years old in the summer of 1968 when I married James Miller. He had dark hair, a crooked smile, and grease permanently under his fingernails from working at the Ford plant outside Toledo. He made me laugh so hard I once snorted soda out of my nose at a diner. Everyone told me I'd gotten lucky. My father shook his hand and said, "Take care of my girl." My mother cried during the wedding reception at the American Legion Hall, and I believed every word of it. I thought I had married the right man. 3 years later, I wasn't so sure anymore. James left his boots in the hallway. He barely talked after work. He wanted silence when I needed conversation, and conversation when I needed silence. He thought buying a new pickup truck was a good idea. I thought paying off the mortgage was a better one. We argued about money. We argued about his sister. We argued about my friends from church. And sometimes we argued about things so stupid I honestly can't remember what they were, but I remember the feeling. It felt enormous, like our marriage was slowly cracking open. I remember standing at the kitchen sink one night thinking, I made a mistake. Maybe I married the wrong man. I was 26 years old when I said those words out loud. Our son Andrew was 2. Our daughter Rebecca was still a baby. I was sitting on a porch swing with my neighbor Helen Carter, a woman who had been married longer than I had been alive. She must have been about 70 then. I told her everything, that James and I fought, that we didn't understand each other, that maybe we were wrong for each other. I expected sympathy, maybe a hug, maybe a quiet, "You deserve better." Instead, Helen burst out laughing, not a polite laugh, a deep belly laugh that made the porch swing shake. Then she looked at me and said something that stayed with me for the next half-century. She said, "Dorothy, we all marry the wrong person." I stared at her like she'd lost her mind. And she leaned closer and said the sentence that saved my marriage. The trick is deciding to make them the right person anyway. I didn't understand what she meant, not at 26. Not even at 30. But after 5 decades of marriage, 2 children, 3 grandchildren, layoffs, illnesses, funerals, and more arguments than I could ever count, I finally understood. Because the man I married at 23 was not the same man who held my hand in a hospital room when I was 79. People change. You change. Life reshapes you both in ways no wedding vow can predict. The James I married was young and impatient. At 40, he was exhausted from working double shifts. At 55, he was scared after losing his job when the factory closed. At 70, he became soft and funny again. He started holding my hand during movies. At 80, his hand shook when he poured coffee, and I had to remind him to take his medication. So tell me something. Which version of James did I marry? All of them? None of them? The truth is, I married a stranger who kept becoming a new person every decade. At 23, I was shy. At 40, I was stubborn. At 52, after my father died, I became bitter for a while. At 65, I finally learned patience. At 74, when doctors told me I might have cancer, I became terrified of losing everything we had built. The young woman James married would barely recognize the woman I became, and truth be told, she might not even like her. But marriage doesn't give you the option of starting over with someone new every time you both change. Instead, you grow together, even when you grow in different directions. Here's something else nobody tells you about marriage. There will be years, real years, when you don't even like the person you married. I know that sounds terrible, but it's the truth. There were years when James and I barely spoke, years when the only conversations we had were about bills, groceries, and whether the car needed new tires. I remember one winter in the early 1980s. The factory laid off half the workers. James came home with a cardboard box holding his tools. He sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at nothing. He stopped laughing, stopped joking, stopped being the man I married. For months, he barely got out of bed, and I remember thinking something I was ashamed to admit. Maybe this is it. Maybe our marriage is over. Not because we didn't love each other, but because life had changed him into someone I didn't recognize anymore. Money got tight. I started working extra shifts at the hospital cafeteria in Cleveland. James picked up odd mechanic jobs in neighbors' garages. We were tired all the time. And when people are tired, scared, and broke, they fight. We fought about everything. About money, about how to raise the kids, about the old leaking roof, about things so small they felt ridiculous the next morning. There were nights I slept on the couch. There were mornings I thought seriously about packing a suitcase. I even imagined what my life would look like alone. But here's the strange thing. Even during those years, I never stopped choosing him. Not because it was easy, and certainly not because he was perfect, but because somewhere along the way I had made a quiet decision. Our marriage mattered more than my temporary unhappiness. People love to say marriage is 50-50. That's nonsense. Marriage is rarely balanced. Some years it's 80-20, some years it's 90-10, and sometimes one person is carrying almost everything. When James lost his job, I carried us. When my health failed years later, he carried me. When I had surgery in my 70s, that man who once couldn't even remember to take out the trash was suddenly cooking meals, doing laundry, and helping me walk to the bathroom. Not once did he complain. Not once. That's when I understood something important. Marriage isn't about fairness. It's about showing up when the other person can't. The funny thing about time is that it changes how you see everything. The things that drove me crazy at 30 became things I loved at 60. James was always quiet. For years, I thought that meant he didn't care, that he was ignoring me. But one day our son Andrew said something that changed how I saw it. He said, "Dad doesn't talk fast because he thinks before he speaks." And suddenly it clicked. James wasn't ignoring me. He was processing, thinking, taking his time. Once I understood that, our arguments started to disappear. Not because he changed, but because I finally understood who he was. When I look at younger couples today, I honestly feel a little sorry for them. They expect their spouse to be everything. Your best friend, your therapist, your financial partner, your adventure buddy, your intellectual equal, your perfect romantic partner, all at the same time, forever. That's impossible. James wasn't my best friend. My best friend was Carol, the woman I played bingo with every Thursday. James didn't read books like I did. He understood engines and machines in ways I never could. Half the time we didn't even want the same things from life. But he was my partner, and that was enough. More than enough. I'm 81 now. James has been gone 6 years. Sometimes I still reach across the bed at night, expecting to feel his hand there. Sometimes I hear a truck engine outside, and for a second I think he's coming home from work. Then I remember, and the house gets quiet again. I don't miss him because he was perfect. He wasn't. Lord knows he wasn't. I miss him because he was mine, and I was his. Together we raised 2 children. We survived layoffs, illnesses, funerals, and 1,000 ordinary days that slowly turned into a life. We laughed until we cried. And sometimes we cried until we laughed again. At my age, I don't think that question matters anymore. I married a person, and then we spent nearly 60 years deciding over and over again to make that choice work. So if you're sitting there tonight wondering whether you married the wrong person, you probably did. Most of us did. Marriage is a mistake you make on purpose, and then you spend a lifetime working like hell to turn it into the best mistake you ever made. The real question isn't, did I marry the right person? The real question is, am I willing to keep choosing this person, even when it's hard? Because love isn't a feeling. Feelings come and go. Love is a decision you make every day. I chose James Miller for 57 years, and if I had the chance, I'd choose him again, every single time. A few months after James passed away, my grandson Daniel came to visit. He was 27 then, about the same age I was when I first started wondering if I had married the wrong man. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same old oak table James and I had eaten at for 40 years. Daniel looked nervous. He kept turning his coffee mug in circles. Finally, he said, "Grandma, I think I made a mistake." I knew immediately what he meant. He had been married less than 2 years, and already he was worried. He said his wife argued too much, that they didn't understand each other, that maybe they had rushed into marriage. I listened quietly, because I had heard those exact same words once before, from a much younger version of myself. When he finished talking, he asked me the question young people always ask older ones. "Grandma, how do you know if you married the right person?" I smiled, because after 81 years on this earth, I finally knew the answer. I told him something that surprised him. I said, "Daniel, that's the wrong question." He looked confused, so I leaned back in my chair and told him the truth. The truth nobody tells you when you're young. You will both change, not a little, completely. The person you married at 25 will not be the same person sitting across from you at 40, or 60, or 70. Life will reshape both of you in ways neither of you can imagine. Careers will rise and fall. Parents will die. Your body will betray you. Your dreams will shift. And the person you married will become a stranger several times over during your lifetime. So I told Daniel this. Marriage isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about deciding that when the person you love inevitably becomes someone new, you will learn that new person all over again, again, and again, and again, for the rest of your life. Some versions of them you will adore. Some versions will drive you completely insane. But if you stay long enough, you'll get to meet the beautiful versions too. The older, gentler, wiser versions. The versions softened by time. Those are the ones that make the whole journey worth it. Before Daniel left that day, he asked me one more thing. "Grandma, what do you miss most about Grandpa?" I didn't even have to think about it. It wasn't the big things, not the vacations, not the anniversaries, not even the day we got married. The thing I miss most is the ordinary mornings. James sitting at the table reading the newspaper. The sound of his coffee spoon clinking against the mug. The quiet way he'd say, "Morning, Dot." 57 years of ordinary mornings, and somehow those turned into the most extraordinary life I could have asked for. So if you're watching this and wondering whether you married the wrong person, let an old woman tell you something. You might have, but that doesn't mean your story is doomed, because love, the real kind, isn't something you find. It's something you build, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice, and if you're lucky, one day you'll wake up at 81 years old, sitting at the same kitchen table, missing someone who was never perfect, but who chose you, and whom you chose back, for a lifetime.